We're glad to have you here for what I'm sure will be the first of many productive conversations with the committee in your new role. Thank you. Next, I want to introduce Dr. David Kessler. He is the Chief Science Officer of the Biden administration's COVID-19 response. In this role, Dr. Kessler is focused on crucial issues such as vaccine review and approval and the logistics of manufacturing millions more doses of vaccine. He's been instrumental in helping reach President Biden's goal of 100 million vaccinations in 100 days. Congratulations on that, Doctor. He brings to his role a wealth of experience from his time serving as Commissioner of Food and Drugs under Presidents George H.W. Bush and President Bill Clinton, and from his work on a range of public health issues like HIV/AIDS, tobacco regulation, and helping Americans improve their nutritional habits. Dr. Kessler completed his JD at University of Chicago Law School, received his MD from Harvard Medical School, and completed his residency in pediatrics at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dr. Kessler, I'm glad to have you with us today. Dr. Peter Marks is the Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research for the Food and Drug Administration. It's a position he assumed in 2016 after serving as Deputy Director of the Center for several years. He has helped lead the center through the approval of several groundbreaking treatments, including the first CAR T-cell therapy for advanced cancer, the first gene therapies, and the first Ebola vaccine. Dr. Marks has played a critical role in the development of guidance for vaccine manufacturers and the authorization of COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Marks received his MD and his PhD in cell and molecular biology at New York University and completed an internal medicine residency and hematology and oncology fellowship at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. After completing his training, Dr. Marks worked as a clinician scientist and later as clinical director of hematology for Brigham and Women's Hospital, and later managed the adult leukemia service at Yale University and served as the chief clinical officer of the Yale New Haven Hospital Cancer Center. Dr. Marks, we're very glad to have you with us today. And with that, we will begin our testimony. Dr. Fauci, I will start with you.
Madam Chair, Ranking Member Burr, members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss with you the role of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in research addressing COVID-19. I think we have some slides, so if we could show them. If not, I will go without them. Next slide. The NIAID strategic plan has 4 major components to it: improving fundamental knowledge of the virus, developing diagnostics and assays, characterizing and testing therapeutics, and finally developing safe and effective vaccines. If I could have the next slide. The first that we'll discuss, back one, sorry. The first that we'll discuss is the characterization and testing of therapeutics. Next slide. When one thinks about therapeutics, next slide. When one thinks about therapeutics for COVID-19, one thinks of first early to moderate disease and next moderate to advanced disease. In the first category, there are a number of interventions that have been approved either by the FDA, such as remdesivir, or have received emergency use authorization from the FDA, including monoclonal antibodies from Lilly and Regeneron. In addition, convalescent plasma has received an EUA. If you move on to moderate or advanced disease, the standard of care now is dexamethasone, which in a randomized placebo-controlled trial has clearly shown a diminution in the overall mortality over 28 days in patients with advanced disease, including those requiring mechanical ventilation as well as high-flow oxygen. Next slide. However, the future of therapeutics, we feel strongly, lies in the identification of vulnerable targets in the SARS-CoV-2 replication cycle, and to design drugs to specifically inhibit those vulnerable targets. This has been a strategy that has been successful to a great degree with HIV drugs as well as the curative drugs for hepatitis C. Next slide, the development of safe and effective vaccines. Next. Although we have done very, very quickly with regard to the development of a vaccine, the work on a vaccine started literally decades before the January recognition that we were dealing with a new virus. And I refer specifically to the role of NIH, particularly the Vaccine Research Center, and our large number of grantees and contractors who, for decades, were doing basic preclinical and clinical research to develop new vaccine platforms, including the messenger RNA, which has been so successful. In addition, at the Vaccine Research Center, the groundbreaking work of the stabilization of the prefusion spike protein, which has served as the immunogen for 5 out of the 6 vaccines that are currently being tested under the auspices of the United States. And finally, we pivoted our extensive NIAID domestic and international clinical trials networks that have previously been established for HIV and influenza and have used them in the extensive clinical trials for COVID-19. This slide shows the 3 platforms and 6 companies that have now been used successfully to develop the 3 vaccines that currently have an EUA with a very high degree of efficacy and a good safety profile, as well as 2 others that are on the way. Next slide. This slide is a prototype of what's happened with multiple vaccine candidates. It's an extraordinary reflection of scientific advances. On January 10th, the sequence of the virus was known. 65 days later, a phase 1 trial was started. On July 27th, 2 of the vaccines went into phase 3 trial. And in an extraordinary feat, 11 months later, less than 1 year, there was vaccines that had shown to be highly efficacious with a good safety profile. This is something that is unprecedented in the history of vaccinology and really is a reflection of not only the fundamental basic science advances, but extraordinary partnerships between the government and the private sector. And on this final slide, although this is all good news, there still are challenges ahead, particularly with regard to the variants that have now become very familiar to us. They are mutational changes in the virus strains that challenge us both from the standpoint of spreading more rapidly, having a greater degree of pathogenesis, and even evading some of our monoclonal antibodies. But we can counter that in 2 ways. One, by vaccination, maintaining the immune response against wild type, either by continuing to get a good quarter of vaccinations or boosting potentially in the future. Also, and finally, as always, to continue to implement the public health measures in the forms of masks, distance, avoiding congregate settings, and washing hands. I'll stop there and be happy to answer questions later, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, distinguished members of the committee, I am Dr. David Kessler, and I'm honored to be serving as the Chief Scientific Officer of the COVID-19 response. 40 years ago, I had the privilege of sitting in those seats behind you as the most junior member of the staff of this committee, led by Senator Hatch and Senator Kennedy. Thank you for having me back and for the opportunity to testify before you today.
David, would you make sure that microphone is on, or could you pull it just a little bit closer? There you go.
Today, the United States is in a very special position with 3 authorized vaccines for the prevention of COVID-19. I want to acknowledge the significant work of those who came before, who worked tirelessly to make this happen. If I can have the first slide, please. As you can see from that slide, when we get it up, we now have enough vaccine available for all American adults by May 31st. When we first arrived at the President's direction, the operation, building on the work of our predecessors at BARDA, DOD, NIAID, FDA, CDC, HHS, and the private sector, we made additional purchases of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, making 300 million doses of each available by July 31st. Working with Pfizer and Moderna, we were able to get each company to agree to deliver 200 million doses each. That's 200 million regimens each by the end of May. Then we also worked with Johnson & Johnson to help accelerate their delivery of 100 million doses by the end of May. To provide additional vaccine availability, we worked to forge an historic manufacturing collaboration between Johnson & Johnson and Merck. I want to update you, if I may, on 3 critical initiatives. First, as a pediatrician, we need to carefully evaluate data on the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines in adolescents and children. We are currently supporting multiple clinical trials to help us understand vaccine safety and immunogenicity in pediatric populations, which is a high priority for us. Second, we are also working to address questions about variants. While the current vaccines have proven highly effective, we are also supporting studies on variants and efforts to produce the next iteration of these vaccines. We will remain vigilant and pursue options to protect Americans if the need arises. Finally, we are planning for potential boost doses of vaccines if they are needed. We are studying the durability of existing vaccines and their ability to maintain an immunological response. As with other vaccines, a subsequent dose may be needed. There are many options that we can consider for booster doses. We are studying potential booster doses and planning now to have sufficient vaccine available if necessary. I look forward to working with members of this committee as we address the issues that I have highlighted. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kessler. We'll turn to Dr. Marks.
Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, distinguished members of the committee. I'm Peter Marks, Director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today to describe the agency's COVID-19 response efforts. All of our efforts are in close coordination and collaboration with our partners across the federal government to help ensure the development, authorization, or licensure and availability of safe and effective medical products to address the COVID-19 public health emergency. While my testimony will focus on FDA's work regarding COVID-19 vaccines, I want to note at the outset that this is in the context of the breadth of work that we're doing across the agency to address the pandemic, including our work on therapeutics and diagnostics. With the urgency called for during this pandemic, FDA, through our transparent scientific review process, has provided emergency use authorization, or EUA for short, for 3 COVID-19 vaccines. In doing so, we've relied upon the agency's rigorous standards for safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality. Though there may be some differences in the results obtained using these 3 COVID-19 vaccines, it should be noted that they were not compared in a head-to-head clinical trial. All 3 were found by FDA and its external advisory committee to exceed the standards for an EUA that we articulated in guidance, and importantly, all did an excellent job in preventing hospitalization and death from COVID-19. Following vaccine authorization or approval, FDA works with manufacturers to help ensure continued supply and availability of these critical medical products. The agency does this by promptly reviewing proposed technical or manufacturing changes and monitoring the continued quality of these products. For example, FDA recently reviewed the data submitted by Pfizer to allow undiluted frozen vials of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to be transported and stored at conventional temperatures commonly found in pharmaceutical freezers for up to 2 weeks. This will help ease the burden of procuring ultra-cold storage equipment for vaccination sites and should help to get vaccines to more places. FDA also plays an integral role in the monitoring of the safety of authorized COVID-19 vaccines. FDA is doing so in collaboration with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and other academic and large non-governmental healthcare data systems. In addition, FDA actively participates in ongoing international pharmacovigilance efforts, including those organized by the International Coalition of Medicine's regulatory authorities and the World Health Organization. These efforts are in addition to the pharmacovigilance efforts being undertaken by the individual manufacturers of the authorized vaccines. Given the importance of passive and active safety monitoring, a coordinated and overlapping approach using state-of-the-art technology has been implemented. These systems can also potentially be leveraged to assess safety in specific populations and assess vaccine effectiveness, including against emerging variants. The emergence of such virus variants raises new concerns about the performance of the authorized COVID-19 vaccines, as well as therapeutics and diagnostics. Just last month, FDA issued 3 new guidances and an update to our vaccine EUA guidance to address the emergence of SARS coronavirus 2 variants. By issuing these, we want the American public to know that we are using every tool at our disposal to fight this pandemic, including pivoting as the virus adapts. These guidances will help manufacturers develop medical products to provide healthcare providers with the best available diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines to fight this virus, even as variants emerge. We remain committed to getting these life-saving products to the front lines. In closing, I would like to stress that having 3 vaccines authorized by FDA only 1 year after the declaration of the pandemic is a tremendous achievement and a testament to the dedication of a multitude of partners. And these include FDA's career scientists and physicians who have been working tirelessly to conduct comprehensive and rigorous evaluation of the data submitted for vaccines to prevent COVID-19. All of those working at the agency are also grateful to be able to contribute measurably toward bringing this pandemic to an end. Thank you, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Marks. We'll turn to Dr. Walensky.
Thank you, Chairwoman Mary and Ranking Member Burr, for your invitation to talk with you today and for your leadership during the U.S. response to COVID-19. I have had the honor of being the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for 2 months. Taking on this role in the middle of a pandemic has presented no shortage of challenges, and I am so grateful for the guidance and of the dedicated staff at CDC and the deep expertise they bring. CDC staff continue to work tirelessly to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I am committed to supporting their efforts to ensure that science and evidence drive our path forward. Last week, we crossed the 1-year mark since WHO declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. I want to take a moment to recognize the more than 500,000 American lives lost during the past year. That's 500,000 mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, grandparents, and children who have died because of this virus. Every loss is felt by grieving families, by friends unable to say goodbye, and by communities that have been devastated by this pandemic. While we have recently seen reductions in cases and deaths, we must remain cautious. The average daily death rate is still tragically more than twice the rate seen last September. We are in a race to stop transmission, and the emergence of variants that spread more easily has made this even more challenging. I'm committed to closely monitoring the proliferation of these variants in this country and around the world. We are doing that by rapidly scaling up genomic sequencing, and we are well on our way to 25,000 samples per week. As we monitor disease transmission and variants, we are getting vaccines into arms quickly, safely, and as equitably as possible. Having 3 vaccines that you just heard about that are highly effective at preventing serious illness, hospitalization, and death will help us end this pandemic. As of March 17th, more than 113 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered. Over 73 million people have received at least 1 dose, including 40 million who are fully vaccinated. This is a remarkable accomplishment, and yet we have so much more to do. CDC is working in coordination with national, state, tribal, local, governmental, and non-governmental partners to build trust in the vaccines, the vaccinator, and the vaccination system. Instrumental to this work is addressing barriers to vaccinations in communities of color and disproportionately affected groups. COVID-19 has highlighted long-standing systemic health disparities, and health equity must be a cornerstone of our public health work. CDC is committed to expanding evidence-based approaches to reduce disparities in COVID-19 cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, prioritizing equity in vaccine distribution and expanding a diverse workforce. This is not our first emergency. Since 2009, the U.S. has faced 4 significant emerging infectious disease threats: the H1N1 influenza pandemic, Ebola, Zika, and now COVID-19. While urgency demanded rapid and unique approaches in response to each of these threats, none resulted in the necessary sustained investments for public health infrastructure. This lack of preparation continues to present significant challenges in our ongoing fight on COVID-19. If we don't act with permanent fixes, these challenges will continue to exist when the next public health threat emerges. I would like to leave you with 4 points today. First, CDC is leading with science and will continue to be the public health resource, scientific resource for the American public and for our international partners. Second, we are expanding the reach of life-saving vaccines and improving vaccine confidence. To end this pandemic, we must also maintain proven effective prevention measures: masks, hand hygiene, and physical distance. Third, health equity must be at the intersection of everything we do in public health, and I am committed to doing that as CDC Director. And we must work towards sustainable investments in public health infrastructure to be better prepared for whatever comes next. I look forward to working together to address both the immediate challenges ahead and the deficiencies in our public health infrastructure that left our country vulnerable to this pandemic. We will get through this pandemic, and I look forward to working with you to support CDC and address our public health challenges at home and abroad. Thank you again for the invitation to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Walensky. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions of our witnesses. I want to thank you all again for being here today. I ask my colleagues to keep track of your clock, stay within those 5 minutes. Dr. Fauci, we have spent over a year responding to the biggest public health crisis in a century. Since you last testified before this committee, life-saving therapeutics and vaccines have reached patients with increasing speed and saved lives. However, we must all do more to end this pandemic and build back stronger and fairer. The majority of the people in this country are not yet vaccinated, and the variants are continuing to threaten our progress. As the nature of this pandemic and the virus itself changes, our response has to change too. What is the biggest challenge ahead in our response to this pandemic?
Right now, the biggest challenge, I think, is multifaceted. One is the staying ahead of this virus itself. We are doing a good job now, up to 2 to 3 million vaccinations per day. If more we get vaccinated, literally every day that goes by and more people get vaccinated, we can stay ahead of what I would consider a race between our ability to vaccinate people and the emergence of variants. We have variants that are well established, like the 117. Luckily, as Dr. Kessler has mentioned, the vaccine does very well against it. But there are other variants that, in fact, when you look at the antibodies induced by the vaccine and their capability of essentially fighting against these variants, they're diminished by anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6-fold. Fortunately for us, the response to the vaccine has been so robust that there still has been enough cushion that you likely would maybe not necessarily prevent infection, but certainly prevent severe disease resulting in hospitalizations and deaths. So the challenge is to stay ahead of the variants. The other is to make sure, and looks like we're doing a good job, and it's getting better and better every day, of get accessibility and implementation of getting the vaccine into people's arms, particularly making sure that we do it not only quantitatively, but with equity with regard to underserved populations. And there's a lot of activity right now that's focusing on making that happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've been really encouraged to hear good news about ramping up vaccine supply in the coming weeks, but I want to ask about what the administration is doing to make sure people trust the safety of COVID-19 vaccines. We have to overcome skepticism about the science as well as active disinformation campaigns and false rumors. So I want to ask Dr. Walensky and Dr. Kessler, how are you working to debunk misinformation about vaccine safety and encourage people to get vaccinated? Dr. Walensky, I'll start with you.
Thank you for that. I think we need to understand exactly the reasons for lack of vaccine confidence, and we need to address them at the local level. We are working very closely with our state local health departments. Resources from the American Rescue Plan will help in that regard towards education. We need to address vaccine hesitancy with regard to its roots. Is it because it's not convenient? Is it because people are not deeming it safe? Is it because they felt that it happened too fast or they're worried about side effects? They need to hear this information from trusted messengers. We've been working last week, or 2 weeks ago, we had a vaccine forum, over 13,000 people sharing ideas of how they're addressing at the local community, and we are continuing in those efforts. We have vaccine confidence consults where we have people who are able to call in and get advice, receive toolkits as to how they can promote vaccine confidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kessler?
Madam Chair, we will have, as a country, through the hard work of this committee and everyone who's come before, we will have within 90 days, in essence, quadrupled our vaccine supply. I believe that we're going to be shifting from a supply issue to a demand issue pretty soon. Just as a pediatrician, I've dealt with the issue of vaccine hesitancy in children. And I think it's very important that we understand that the American people look to their health professionals for guidance. We are approaching 100 million shots in arms. That's a remarkable number. And I think that one of the most important things that we can all do is to, when we look at those 100 million shots in arms, look at the remarkable, knock wood, safety profile. Things can happen. We are ever vigilant. That's the job of my former agency and Dr. Marks. But I think that to date, we can sit here in front of the American public and say these are very safe vaccines.
Thank you very much. I will turn it over to Senator Burr for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Tony, I'm going to start with you, and I'll just work my way down. You and other experts have suggested that we need to get 60% to 70% of the population vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. If the number's higher now, can we reach the number without vaccination of children under 18, which is roughly 140 million Americans?
You know, Senator Burr, I'd like to maybe backtrack a bit and say I think we should be careful about wedding ourselves to this concept of herd immunity, because we really do not know precisely for this particular virus what that is. You know, I have been saying lately calculation, and it's purely an estimate, of 70 to 85% of the population. If it is that, we would probably have to get more children. And I believe as we get high school students vaccinated in the fall, we'll be able to reach that. But let me just emphasize that comment. As I was said in my response to Chairman Murray, that every day we get 2 to 3 more million, and we get closer and closer to where we want to be. We don't really know what that magical point of herd immunity is, but we do know that if we get the overwhelming population vaccinated, we're going to be in good shape. And you're right in your question. We ultimately would like to get and have to get children into that mix.
David, we can both agree that Operation Warp Speed is a success story of American innovation and ingenuity. What do you see as the biggest challenge that we face over the next 30, 60, 90, and beyond?
In the next 30 days, 60 days?
30, 60, and 90 and beyond.
But let's take the first 30, 60. I think it's what the chair raised, vaccine hesitancy. I think we're going to have to make sure that people understand how important being vaccinated is and how what the safety profile is. I wasn't convinced when I started, but I am convinced now that, as Dr. Fauci said, we are in a race against these variants. And the most important thing we can do currently is all as citizens is to step up, not for us, but for our families and for our fellow citizens to become vaccinated. I think, Senator, in your opening comments, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there are many things we can do to learn the lessons over the last year. I think it's a phenomenal story, but I think there are lessons to learn, and I look very much forward to working with you and your staff to doing that.
Thank you for that. Peter, FDA now has experience evaluating the messenger RNA platform and a baseline understanding of the technology. What steps will FDA take to make sure that the technology does not have to go through approval again, but new indications would? If you look at our annual flu process, we use the same technology, but with a different formulation on an annual basis, and that's sort of an expedited process. Can we expect to see over time a similar type of approach to messenger RNA platform and the clinical requirements only for the new indications?
So thank you for that question, Senator Burr. So I think we can say that that is the case over the course of time. For the first couple of changes that might be made for variants, we probably will have to go through having some clinical studies, but they won't be clinical outcome studies. They'll be ones where we look at the immune response. It's possible that once we understand how these perform, that we won't actually even need studies in people. We'll be able to do like what we do for influenza. Ultimately, the place we would like to get to is really understanding which pathogens go with which platforms, because it turns out that the mRNA platform seems to be very good for certain pathogens, but it may not be good for others, just as the vesicular stomatitis virus platform that was used for the Ebola vaccine seems to be very good for certain pathogens, but not for others. So we need to be able to do the science to understand that matching, and that in the future will hopefully expedite this even further to rely on these platforms that we understand.
Madam Chairman, a quick question for CDC, if I could have the indulgence of the chair. Rochelle, can you understand why the American people were somewhat baffled when it took 3 months for CDC to issue guidance on what vaccinated Americans should do, precautions they should take, things that they could forget that had been told? You said we're leaning on the science, and the science certainly suggested something. Is that the norm in the future, that it's going to be delayed like that, or do you see that being expedited in the future?
Thank you for that question. We are working and looking at the science as it emerges and evaluating the science in real time. Our CDC guidance on what to do when you're vaccinated came when less than 10% of the American public was vaccinated. During a time of emerging variants and emerging science around those variants, and during a time when we were looking to see whether vaccinated people could actually transmit disease. So we needed to see what that science was before we were able to provide that guidance. And we are working in real time as additional science emerges to update that guidance as, in fact, more people get vaccinated. May I just return to the question of herd immunity? And I just want to make sure folks understand that the concept of herd immunity is an epidemiologic term that is 1/1 minus R naught. R naught is the transmissibility of the virus, and that actually turns out to be a moving target as we have different variants. So as we think even conceptually about herd immunity, I think we need to understand that as we have more transmissible variants, our target for herd immunity may change. As well, when we look at children, if they actually are not as transmissible, the young children, then in fact we may not have to vaccinate at the same level. Young children, I believe that children should be vaccinated, but I just want to make sure we understand the target.
Thank the chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair Murray. It seems to me, and certainly I've heard testimony from our witnesses today, that one of the most significant threats to the progress we're making in this pandemic is the emergence of variants and mutations that could possibly elude the treatments that have been developed and the vaccines that are being deployed. Fortunately, the American Rescue Plan provides $1.75 billion for CDC to ramp and scale up efforts on genomic sequencing and surveillance. I was a proud champion of this provision because I think it's so important that we know what possible threats to our progress exist. Dr. Walensky, can you describe how the CDC will use this $1.75 billion to combat emerging mutations and variants of the coronavirus, and also give us a sense of how many of the positive test samples ought to be sequenced in order to really have a firm grasp on the emergence of variants?
Thank you so much, Senator, and thank you for all of your support in getting us resources to be able to do so. The initial $200 million that was given to CDC to scale up sequencing, we're now doing somewhere between 10 and 14,000 sequences a week, and that is in collaboration with commercial labs, that is in collaboration with public health labs, with academia. The additional $1.75 billion is in fact essential to help fund jurisdictions for next genome sequencing capacity. Not all jurisdictions have this capacity, and we really do need to be able to scale this up across the country. We actually need to be able to scale up our own surge capacity within the CDC for sequencing infrastructure, for CLIA-competent labs, for having scientific computing and IT in CDC so that we can use that infrastructure for when the next surge arises. We need to develop a workforce so that people understand how to do genomic epidemiology. That is not standard education. That is not what people standardly know, and so we need to develop that workforce. And then we need to bolster exactly what's being done already, because we're only at 14,000 right now. We really would like to be up at the 25,000 range. Of course, the number of sequences you do very much depends on the number of the amount of cases that we have circulating. And so we'd like to be up to around 25,000, somewhere in the 5 to 10% of the amount of cases that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. As government looks to invest in supply chain resiliency, using funds provided by Congress for COVID response and pandemic preparedness, we know one thing to be true, that we can no longer afford to have an inadequate domestic vaccine supply chain. While the delivery method will always be vaccine dependent, there are certain supplies that it seems to me would make sense to have advanced purchase of and sufficient stockpiles of. Things like vials, stoppers, syringes, needle caps. Manufacturers must be able to rapidly surge production for a future pandemic without doing long-term damage to their broad customer base. So Dr. Marks, can you describe some of the early obstacles that FDA faced as a result of our over-reliance on foreign manufacturers of critical medical supplies? And what role do you think our national stockpile system could play in helping to maintain surge capacity for American-made critical medical supplies, including those needed for vaccinations?
So I may defer some of the stockpile question to Dr. Kessler, but I will say that there clearly was a critical shortage of vials and other manufacturing equipment to be able to move ahead and rapidly produce vaccines. I think that was part of what was overcome by a cooperative effort between industry and government partners early on in this pandemic to try to pick up the pace on that. But I think a key piece of learning for the future is that we have to start to rely on more advanced manufacturing technologies, things that allow us to scale up production, not just for drugs and biologics, but also even for devices so that we can move more quickly.
Senator, if I could...
Please go ahead.
Senator, if I could just add, there is a team, a very dedicated team at DOD, BARDA, HHS, who spend their days and have been doing this for months, sourcing the globe for supplies. In the rescue plan, there is a specific provision that will enhance our ability to make sure going forward things like lipids that are key ingredients, that we will have adequate supplies prior to the time we need them.
Chair Murray, with your indulgence, I would just like to formally request that our committee receive a briefing on the state of the strategic national stockpiles, and that the administration provide members with detailed breakdowns of supply chains associated with the current approved vaccine candidates, including manufacturing locations, and that be classified if necessary. I know some of the information regarding the national stockpiles is sensitive.
Thank you. We will do that. Thank you very much. Senator
Thank
Paul.
you.
Senator Paul.
Dr. Fauci, in a recent British study, David Wiley and others found that no symptomatic reinfections from COVID-19 after following 2,800 patients for several months. In fact, there have been no reports of significant numbers of reinfections after acquiring COVID-19 naturally. Shane Crotty, a virologist at La Jolla Institute for Immunology, concludes from his experiments that the amount of immune memory gained from natural infection would likely prevent the vast majority of people from getting hospitalized disease, severe disease for many years. In this study, which was published in Science, Dr. Crotty showed that antibody levels stayed relatively constant with only modest declines over 6 to 8 months. Dr. Crotty reported that, notably, memory B cells specific for the spike protein, or RBD, were detected in almost all COVID-19 cases with no apparent half-life at 5 to 8 months after infection. In other words, Dr. Crotty found significant evidence of long-term immunity after COVID infection. Furthermore, Dr. Crotty noted B-cell memory to some other infections has been observed for as long as 60-plus years after smallpox vaccination, or even 90 years after a natural infection with influenza. That was a woman who got the Spanish flu, still showed immunity 90 years later. So rather than being pessimistic towards people gaining immunity after they've had COVID or had a vaccine, studies argue for significant optimism. In fact, there have been no scientific studies arguing or proving that infection with COVID does not create immunity. There have been no studies showing significant numbers of reinfections. Of the 30 million Americans who have had COVID, only a handful of reinfections have been discovered. In fact, the New York Times reported last fall more than 38 million people at the time worldwide had been infected with the coronavirus, and as of that date, fewer than 5 of these cases had been confirmed by scientists to be reinfections. Scientists interviewed for the article concluded, in most cases, a second bout with the virus produced milder symptoms or none at all. Given that no scientific studies have shown significant numbers of reinfections of patients previously infected or previously vaccinated, what specific studies do you cite to argue that the public should be wearing masks well into 2022?
I'm not sure I understand the connection of what you're saying about masks and reinfection. We're talking about people who have never been infected before.
You're telling everybody to wear a mask, whether they've had an infection or a vaccine. What I'm saying is they have immunity, and everybody agrees they have immunity. What studies do you have that people that have had the vaccine or have had the infection are spreading the infection? If we're not spreading the infection, isn't it just theater?
No, it's
not.
not.
You have the vaccine and you're wearing 2 masks. Isn't that theater?
No, that's not. Here we go again with the theater. Let's get down to the facts. Okay, the studies that you quote from Crotty and Sete look at in vitro examination of memory immunity, which in their paper they specifically say this does not necessarily pertain to the actual protection. It's in vitro.
And what studies can you point to that shows significant reinfection? There are no studies that show significant reinfection.
Let me finish the response to your question, if you please. The other thing is that when you talk about reinfection and you don't keep in the concept of variants, that's an entirely different ballgame. That's a good reason for a mask. In the South African study conducted by J&J, they found that people who were infected with wild type and were exposed to the variant in South Africa, the 351, it was as if they had never been infected before. They had no protection. So when you talk about reinfection, you've got to make sure you're talking about wild type. I agree with you that you very likely would have protection from wild type for at least 6 months if you're infected. But we in our country now have variants that are circulating.
Significant reinfection. What study shows significant reinfection, hospitalization, and death after either natural infection or the vaccine? It doesn't exist. There is no evidence that there are significant reinfections after vaccine. In fact, I don't think we have a hospitalization in the United States after the 2-week period after the second vaccination. We don't have a death in the United States.
You're not hearing what I'm saying about variants. We're talking about wild type versus variants.
And
now,
what proof is there that there are significant reinfections with hospitalizations and death from the variants? None in our country. Zero.
Well, because we don't have a prevalent of a variant yet. We're having one. Can I finish? We're having 117 that's becoming more dominant.
Policy based on conjecture.
No,
it
isn't based on conjecture.
Variants, so you want people to wear a mask for another couple years.
No.
You've been vaccinated and you parade around in 2 masks for show.
No.
You can't get it again. There's virtually 0% chance you're going to get it, and you're telling people that have had the vaccine, who have immunity. You're defying everything we know about immunity by telling people to wear a mask who've been vaccinated.
No.
Instead, you should be saying there is no science to say we're going to have a problem from the large number of people being vaccinated. You want to get rid of vaccine hesitancy? Tell them they can quit wearing their mask after they get the vaccine. You want people to get the vaccine? Give them a reward instead of telling them that the nanny state's going to be there for 3 more years and you got to wear a mask forever. People don't want to hear it. There's no science behind it.
Well, let me just state for the record that masks are not theater. Masks are protective. And we
have immunity there, theater. If you already have immunity, you're wearing a mask to give comfort to others. You're not wearing a mask because of any science.
I totally disagree with you.
Dr. Fauci, if you could respond so that we could understand the difference between the virus itself and the variants and the reason for a mask.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't.
If you could respond to the question so that we could all understand the difference between the vaccine in controlling the wild type versus the variants that are out there and the reason for wearing a mask, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, yes. First of all, when you have a variant, you have an immunity that you get what's convalescent sera and the same sort of thing. If I vaccinate you or me against the wild type, you get a certain level of antibody that's specific for a particular viral strain. If there's a circulating variant, you don't necessarily have it. You have some spillover immunity to be sure, but you diminish by anywhere from 2 to 8-fold the protection. So the point I'm saying is that there are variants in now circulating. The point that Senator Paul was making was that if you look at wild type only, there is some clear-cut credence to what he's saying. But we are living right now in a situation where we're having a dominance of 117, which was the original UK. We have a very troublesome variant in New York City, a 526. We've got 2 variants in California, a 427, 429, and we have a number of others. So we're not dealing with a static situation of the same virus. That was the only point I'm making.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Fauci, thank you for setting an example over the course of the last year for Americans. You have made it clear that masks save lives, and the example that you have set that has not been followed by other leaders in this country has made a difference, has kept tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans from contracting this disease, so thank you. I wanted to turn to the question of the massive contracts that we've signed with vaccine makers and to talk a little bit about the path forward. Pfizer reported about $9.6 billion in profit last year. Moderna, very small company before entering the vaccine market. Their chief executive owns shares that are probably now worth about $5 billion. Thank goodness for these companies. They have done remarkable work in a short period of time. They have saved lives. At the same time, we want to make sure that we are making wise use of taxpayer dollars. And so I'm going to direct this question to Dr. Kessler, and others can weigh in. Dr. Kessler, do you sort of understand what the difference is between AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, who have said that they're pursuing a nonprofit model in developing the vaccine, versus Pfizer and Moderna, who I assume, because they have not made the same statement, are pursuing a for-profit model? Help me understand what the difference is between those two.
Senator, all those are good questions, and you have every right to be, confused, because it is very confusing. I lived very much in the 1990s. We worked on HIV when I was at FDA and chaired the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. So we cared a lot about getting drugs in that instance to the world, and that led to something called tiered pricing. And you will see that there are multiple numbers. I mean, there is this number that is, cost, and there's cost plus, there's a not-for-profit cost, and all those have, very honestly, different definitions. I think the most important thing to stress right now, and I have been no defender of the pharmaceutical industry, and certainly on pricing, over my career, but I think the fact is that this committee, the Congress, you allowed the administration to go at risk, right? And we bought different vaccines. The administration bought different vaccines, regardless of even what they worked, and they, at the best price. And the reality is, thank God for that, because we are in a very fortunate position today. I am sure with hindsight, there are a lot of legitimate questions, and we have to do better at understanding these prices. And I pledge to you, we will do that. It's not an easy answer.
I understand. Let me just, because I've got a minute left, let me just ask two quick follow-up questions. On an earnings call last month, when asked about profit margins for the vaccine, the chief financial officer at Pfizer suggested the company's going to, quote, get more on price after what he called the pandemic pricing environment. One analyst projected that the company could make vaccine prices 3 to 4 times higher than they are today. Do you believe that we have the ability to keep vaccine prices at a point that is favorable for the American taxpayers? And then what do you think about making these contracts disclosable, so that it's sort of hard for the American public or outside groups to do oversight when they can't see the contracts?
I can tell you, Senator, the President believes very firmly, in making sure that there are affordable medicines and vaccines, and we will work very hard. It's my understanding that the contracts are publicly available, albeit with redactions, and happy to work with you to even improve on that.
Great. I appreciate it. I know this administration has a commitment to getting the best value. Obviously, the priority is getting shots in people's arms, and so let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. At the same time, hearing that we might be looking at 3 to 4 times the amount of price as we move into booster shots or childhood immunizations, certainly should be something we should all pay attention to. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Collins.
Dr. Walensky, The CDC school reopening guidance has been at odds with what many public health experts are recommending. When we discussed this issue recently, I really detected a lack of a sense of urgency on your part to reopen schools. Let me just share a little bit with everyone here what the public health experts are saying. In USA Today, 4 prominent experts said, the recent school reopening guidance released by CDC is an example of fears influencing and resulting in misinterpretation of science and harmful policy. The American Academy of Pediatricians cautioned against strict adherence to 6 feet of distancing if that forces students into remote learning. And Dr. Jha, who testified before us just last week, said in an interview that the guidance, quote, didn't feel to most of us in the public health world as particularly well-grounded in evidence and science. Maine's own CDC director made the point to me that children are less likely to contract COVID in schools than they are in other settings. Dr. Jha also said that we were focusing on the wrong things. We should be focusing on mask wearing, ventilation, and he said, I did not mention 3 feet versus 6 feet. I did not mention deep cleaning of surfaces. There's a lot that's going on that's gotten us distracted. We can keep teachers safe. We can keep kids safe. We can open schools, and we have the ability to do that now. In the meantime, the negative effects on our children continue to grow. And I'm not just talking about the lost learning. I'm talking about social development. I'm talking about behavioral problems, stress on the children, on their parents. A hospital administrator in Maine told me just yesterday that they're having children dropped off at the emergency room with behavioral problems, and the grandparents or the parent who brought them just driving away, just leaving them there. We have got to get the schools reopened, and you've presented no timeline at all for doing that, and the CDC recommendations, particularly on physical distancing of at least 6 feet, are just not in sync with what most public health experts are recommending. So I'd like to know what you're going to do and when to get our schools reopened.
Thank you for that question. Thank you for the conversation we had, and I'm very sorry it appeared like it wasn't urgent to me. I'm the mother of 3, one of whom has been home for this entire year. This is an urgent issue. I understand the mental health challenges. I understand the educational challenge, this food insecurity. This is urgent. Please don't get me wrong. This is urgent. There was a study out of Wisconsin that demonstrated in schools that in a time of high disease prevalence, that with 92% mask wearing and de-densification of classrooms, somewhere between 11 and 20 students, we could get students back to school safely. There's also a similar study from Georgia that showed without masking and without the proper mitigation strategies, there were outbreaks in 9 elementary schools. So our guidance was intended to lean in. We specifically articulated as it was released that schools that were doing well, we wanted to, and were open, we wanted to keep open. And so as we released this guidance several weeks ago, it was intended for schools to lean in, for schools that were clammed shut to use this guidance to decide what mitigation strategies they needed to do, recognizing that the MMWR that we reported several weeks ago, 60% of students were wearing masks in classrooms. We needed to get those numbers up if this was going to be done safely, and this was the roadmap to do so. On the question of 3 feet and 6 feet, we looked for science to determine what was the proper distance on the question of 3 feet and 6 feet. At the time, you may recall, there were about 250,000 cases per day, and much of our communities were in a very high rates of community spread. We agree on the science that the spread was happening less so in the schools than in the community, but if mask wearing was happening, we were seeing breakouts, and we had science for that. Just last Thursday, I believe, there was a study out of CID from Massachusetts in a place where there was about 100% mask wearing, that 3 feet and 6 feet yielded the same amount of infections, and so that was the first study we had seen that looked at 3 feet versus 6 feet. Indeed, because 6 feet has been such a challenge, science has leaned in, and there are now emerging studies on the question between 3 feet and 6 feet. I'm aware of several that will be released in the next several days, and we are actively looking at our guidance to update it to address that science. Thank you.
You need to do it now. And I agree with you on mask wearing, but I really wish that you would look at this testimony and what these public health experts are saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Chair Murray and Ranking Member Burr, and thanks to the witnesses. I generally don't like to respond to a colleague after the colleague has left the room because it doesn't seem kosher, but the public is watching this hearing, and I want to just get into this mask issue just briefly. I have had COVID, and I've been vaccinated, and I wear a mask. I wear a mask to make other people feel safer, even if there weren't variants. I went to my grocery store during senior hour when there aren't a lot of people there, and my grocery clerk, who cannot telecommute, is petrified about getting COVID. She's petrified about getting COVID. And she stands 8 hours a day, a few feet away from people coming through the line, and she's petrified. She doesn't want to take COVID home to her child in the small apartment where they live. She doesn't want to take COVID home to her mother, who also lives in that small apartment with her. And maybe 30 million Americans have had COVID. That's the reported cases. So say it's double that. Say it's 60 million. Hundreds of millions of Americans have not had COVID. And they're afraid of getting it because they've seen 500,000 people die. And they've seen a whole lot of people suffer. And they've seen people lose their jobs and lose their income and lose their business. The people in this room who haven't had COVID. It makes people around you feel a little bit safer. It makes my grocery store clerk feel a little bit safer if people she's standing a few feet from every day are wearing a mask. And is that so hard to understand? Is it so hard for us to do? We don't care about these workers? I mean, if she saw me come through with no mask, she would be afraid. And I could say, well, look, I've been vaccinated and I've had COVID. Well, maybe she isn't reading the science about what that means. It's just such a minor thing to do to try to protect the hundreds of millions of Americans who are deathly afraid of getting COVID. That's a reasonable fear, and this is a reasonable step that we can take to try to bring down the fear level that people legitimately have. So I have two issues that I just want to put on the table, and I'd love any of you to address them, and they're kind of long-term issues. There will be a day when a president will say the public health emergency is over. There will continue to be a very long tail of consequences on people's mental health. Seeing death, seeing illness, losing their jobs, losing income, isolation. That will be a long consequence. Many members of the committee have worked together on this already, but we think we have more to do. Second, many Americans who've had COVID will have continuing symptoms. I have these weird neurological symptoms a year later. They're not debilitating, they're not painful, but they're weird and they're 24/7. Many people have symptoms that are more serious: heart impairment, respiratory impairment, impairment of mental functioning, fatigue challenges. How should we as a committee, how should we as a nation, how should the institutions you work for be thinking, planning, investing in these two long-term sets of consequences, mental health and the physical needs of the COVID long symptoms?
Let me address the one that you mentioned about the persistent of post-COVID sequelae, which is a really serious and real issue. It's not imaginary. It varies from person to person. The NIH, with the generosity of the Congress, has invested $1.15 billion in collaboration with the CDC and other agencies in looking at the scope of this real phenomenon, this sequelae. what the ultimate pathogenesis is, because we don't know what the mechanisms are. You mentioned a weird neurological symptom. We're not really quite sure what that is. And we're putting together large cohort studies to be able to find out what the incidence of it is, what the variability, what the range of organ system dysfunctions are, and what the underlying pathogenic mechanisms is. Really very puzzling, Senator, because it's different than if someone is in ICU and has lung damage and you have a pulmonary function abnormalities, or you have a cardiomyopathy and you have a stroke volume that's down. It's different than that. It's people who recover, have the virus no longer there, and have a persistence of things like chronic fatigue, muscle aches, temperature dysregulation, funny kind of neurological issues that they can't explain. That's what we're really focusing on in cohorts of tens of thousands of people. So we are looking at that seriously.
Maybe I'll just chime in on the mental health side and say that we are working, first of all, we need to collect the data. We need to understand in real time what the impacts of this are. We need to work with our state and local health departments to ensure that the resources that they have can be disseminated to their local jurisdictions, that we have toolkits on culturally sensitive prevention strategies for prevention of depression, toolkits for mental health, resources to provide. We need to get those disseminated into the local jurisdictions. And then we are working to do the science and cohort studies, exactly as Dr. Fauci noted, on both the mental health issues as well as on the long haul issues.
Thank you very much. Senator Cassidy.
Yeah. Thank you all. Dr. Kessler and Fauci, y'all are generous in your comments of the previous administration's effort without specifically saying them, so thank you for that. I have to admit the chairwoman's opening comments would have imagined that Operation Warp Speed was a Biden administration initiative. Obviously it was not. But all due credit to the current administration, they're making great strides. I appreciate that. And Dr. Walensky, I just also want to point out, as we speak of equity, Kaiser Family Foundation, the COVID-19 vaccine tracker, shows that the greatest hesitancy for vaccination right now is among those in the rural areas and Republicans. For some reason, when people speak about equity and the need for special outreach, those folks never come up. I know that you're aware of that, but I just want to say that for the record. Frank Lentz just recently did a survey group and found that if you present them with facts over and over again, they will be persuaded, but they need to be spoken of by trusted folks. Someone mentioned that earlier, just to say that. And I'm not scolding, I'm just pointing that out because that is a need. Dr. Fauci, I always enjoy your comments. And Dr. Kessler, we've spoken before. It's kind of a mixed message here, that we know that we need to test in children, but we also know that the incidence among children is going to be so low that it could be difficult to have an outcomes-based result. Again, if the incidence in the community is so low, nobody's getting infected anyway, how do you compare a vaccine versus a placebo group? Secondly, and that begs the question, we do need that kind of surrogate marker, those T cell and those B cell markers that would correlate with immunity. And I'm struck that there's a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine in which it says that antibody response in seropositive persons after a single dose of the mRNA vaccine, and showing that antibody titers after a single dose in those previously infected shoots up much more than those who are naive, so to speak, never before been infected. A second dose does not improve that. It just stays flat. Where are we in establishing a surrogate marker that could be used to see if children are immunized? Related to that, where are we in establishing that if you've been previously infected, granted variants are a wild card, but if we have a shortage of vaccine worldwide, it would be very important in Asia and Africa, Mexico, to know that if someone was previously infected, at the most, they would need one more dose of vaccine. It seems like we are being fairly conservative about this. When will we have some answers? And I'm not scolding, I'm just asking. Dr. Fauci?
Thank you for that question, Senator Cassidy. You make a very good point, and we will get what you're referring to is a correlate of immunity, this surrogate marker. And right now we're collecting data from the trials that we did in adults, in which we clearly showed a high degree of efficacy that is associated with a very high degree of neutralizing antibodies, measuring also T-cell responses, but mostly neutralizing antibodies. When we get a firm correlate of immunity, I think we're going to be able to answer the question you say about what sort of surrogate marker that we could tell that someone is actually protected. And I think in the next couple of months, at the latest, we're going to get that data.
So let me ask, because you say a correlate, already you correlate as an association the increase in antibody titer and some sort of proliferation of the T cells. Presumably these are neutralizing antibodies, similar to those used in the monoclonal antibodies. So what additional information do we need? Because obviously the sooner we know this, the better. I've been infected, I've been vaccinated. I really don't think I needed the vaccine, but my wife told me not to come home unless I took it. Yeah. So I guess the question is, but we could have given that vaccine to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when do we think we'll have it, and what's going to be in addition to that which we already know?
Again, another very good question, Senator Cassidy. In the long run, the real proof of the pudding is when the level of antibody goes down below a certain level. If you still have protection, that means it isn't a direct correlation with the height of the antibody level. We know
That's
now
not necessarily true, though. If I may, and in all due respect, what you really want to know is if there's anamnestic memory, as if you're re-exposed to the vaccine, right. And within that window period, your vaccine rises back right. to a protective level.
Yeah, I think
that seems like that would be fairly easily done with the folks who are infected right. now, and maybe their antibody titer has fallen off.
No, you're quite correct. And in fact, the example that you gave is a really excellent example of people who have been infected. And even if you look at them and they don't have necessarily a very high level of antibodies multiple months later, when you vaccinate them, their level goes up 100-fold as opposed to 10-fold. It's just extraordinary, which means they have many more competent memory B cells than they do have level of circulating antibody.
But that is what always happens. I guess I'm asking, since we know that's the case, and you already see evidence of it, it does seem like there's a great hesitancy to admit, if you will, that this could be protective when we know the same thing is true of other viruses, that your antibody titer falling to zero does not mean that you are right. Not protected. Right. Your memory B cells will quickly proliferate. Right. And again, this has such implications for how we use our vaccine now. Yeah. If you could answer this, then I'll yield back because I'm over time.
No, yet again, you're making good points, Senator Cassidy, but since this is a virus for which we don't have previous experience, it's a bit risky to make a direct extrapolation, for example, to influenza or others. It is certainly conceivable that it will match what we've seen with other viruses, but we don't know that as a definite scientific fact yet.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and Ranking Member Burr for having this hearing. Thank you to all of our witnesses for your extraordinary hard work and for your commitment to helping us get through this pandemic and beyond. I also want to just take a minute to thank Senator Kaine for the remarks he just made about the importance of mask wearing at this moment in time as we continue to combat the pandemic. As somebody with a highly vulnerable family member who is cared for by a woman who is 80 years old, I have been holding my breath throughout this, and the fear is real. So I am very grateful to you, Senator, for your comments. Dr. Kessler, earlier this month, I led a group of my colleagues in writing a letter to the Departments of Health and Human Services and Justice to urge them to address serious barriers for individuals with disabilities in the COVID-19 vaccine distribution process. This letter followed reports from constituents in my home state of New Hampshire that they could not access the vaccine registration website using a screen reader, which is a crucial tool for people with vision loss. ensuring that individuals with disabilities and other vulnerable communities can easily register for appointments and access vaccination sites is essential for an equitable distribution of the vaccine. So, Dr. Kessler, how will the federal government partner with states to improve access to the COVID-19 vaccine for individuals with disabilities and older adults?
Senator, absolutely key points, and no doubt we can do better on that. I think we've all been frustrated getting appointments, people staying up throughout the night, refreshing their computers, trying to get appointments. What we've been trying to do is to increase the number of access points, increase the number of vaccinators. As you've heard, we are going to increase, not only we're increasing the number of appointments, the vaccinators, the number of sites, but also working on the information systems. This was a mad dash getting this out, and what you see is just very real. There's a real commitment at the state level, at the federal level, to improving those information systems and the ease of use. Right. We just have to do better.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just also want to point out that as a civil rights issue, the Americans with Disabilities Act does apply here. And it's really critically important that whether it's a telephone system that somebody who has a hearing impairment can use, or a screen that somebody with a visual impairment can use, or a vaccination site where somebody who might have difficulty being exposed to bright lights or a lot of noise for long periods of time has space to be. These are all requirements under the law for access. And it's another time we'll have another discussion about how far the healthcare system has to go in this kind of accessibility generally. But for vaccinations right now, it is an issue we're hearing about a lot from constituents. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. Let me move on to another question for Dr. Kessler and Dr. Fauci. As vaccinations continue to ramp up across the country, you've both mentioned the possibility that we will need to develop booster shots to ensure long-term protection from COVID-19 and respond to existing and future variants of the virus. Are there additional steps we should be taking now in order to ensure that Americans will have timely access to any necessary COVID-19 boosters and make sure that they will understand the importance of taking them, including when the current public health emergency declaration ends? Maybe Dr. Kessler and then Dr. Fauci.
First, we are looking at the data. We know, at least for some of the vaccines, that there appears to be durability at the 6-month point. Yeah. Now, the reason I use the 6-month point is that's because how long the first people have been immunized. So we're continuing to monitor that. And I think what we see, the good news is that durability seems to exist. There is a slow decline, and there is some variability between individuals, right? So we can't sit here today and tell you when, and definitely there will be boosts, but I think we have to plan for it, and I think at some point, my colleagues, I think it may be more likely than not that at some point we will need to boost with the durability, but it depends on a number of questions. So we need to make sure that we have enough vaccines in the cupboard, right, that are ready to go when we need to do that, and we're doing that planning, Senator.
Dr. Fauci, do you want to, I know I'm a little over time, but if you could quickly comment.
Agree completely with Dr. Kessler, but let me just add one thing that adds into the mix of variability, is that there is a considerable degree of variability across the population in the responsiveness to the original vaccine. Remember, we have a lot of people in this country who have underlying conditions. Many people are on drugs for autoimmune diseases, cancers, and things. They get vaccinated. Their level of antibody may not be as high or even multifold lower than an otherwise normal, healthy young person. That person would likely need to be boosted well before the others. So as Dr. Kessler said, there's a considerable amount of variability. What we need to find out is what's the minimum cutoff? Where's the point where absolutely you've got to start giving boosters? And I think we don't know that yet. We just have to follow people long enough to know when the level of antibody goes way down. Because a healthy person may hang up there for months and months and months. Somebody who's on chemotherapy for cancer or glucocorticoids for an autoimmune disease may come way down. That's the point.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
If I may, Senator, may I just chime in and let you know that CDC does have active, on your prior question, active toolkits and playbooks for folks with disabilities. We're working with our local partners and jurisdictions to make sure that vaccine sites have equitable access. There's access in other realms. So I just want to let you know those resources are available.
Thank you very much. Senator Murkowski.
Madam Chairman, thank you to our witnesses. Thank you so very much. It's not very often that Alaska makes the news in the good news category when it comes to health and our statistics, but we're number one. We have moved out early in terms of the vaccination of Alaskans. Right now, it's 18.9% that are fully vaccinated, 28% have received their first vaccine. We have some communities that are approaching 90% vaccination, so we're pretty proud of that. The rest of the country is looking at the model as to how we were able to do it, open it up to everybody over 16. So I think you're looking at that. You don't perhaps need to follow the model of us delivering the vaccine to the clinics by way of snow machine with a sled in back, but the model is good. And it's one that has demonstrated how quickly we can move out. The vaccine guidance and the vaccines, shots in arms, has given us a kind of a ray of hope here. Spring's coming, vaccines are getting in arms, and people are feeling better, but the economy is still struggling. And the guidance that seems to be coming is not perhaps consistent with what we're seeing on the ground, or this is what Alaskans are sharing with me. We have a significant tourist industry. We welcome people to come up. We want them to be safe. We are going to encourage all of the continuing protocols. But we've been struggling in trying to get the economy back on track when 60% of your tourists that come to the state of Alaska come by cruise ship. We've got a conditional no sale order, or a conditional sale order in place that's effectively a no sale order. Dr. Walensky, we've had an opportunity to speak with folks on your team. Alaskans aren't pushing to say, don't send people our way if it's not safe. Don't use this if it's not safe. But what they are asking for is some kind of guidance in terms of timeline. It's the timeline so that you can know to plan. Do we go ahead and the hundreds of small businesses that are reliant on these tourists coming up, do they open up, or do they acknowledge that this is going to be the second season in a year where they will have nothing and effectively know whether to shutter their operations now? So when we're talking about health impacts, we all want to make sure that we're following the guidance and the science and all that comes with it. But there's also this recognition of the economic impact. Certainty is helpful. We haven't had much certainty with this virus, and it's been challenging. Can you give me any kind of guidance to give Alaskans in terms of what we might be able to expect with where this guidance is in the process? When you say later, does that mean at the end of 2021? Does it mean in 3 months? Does it mean in 1 month? What kind of guidance can you provide when it comes to the CDC's order as it relates to the conditional sale order?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I understand the economic impact of the no sale, the conditional sale, and the travel, and so we don't take that lightly. We have provided technical assistance on the conditional sale, where we've provided a 4-phase strategy for how we could get sale open. We are in phase 1 of that, moving towards phase 2. This is an interagency decision. It is not a decision solely up to the CDC. So I would be remiss if I was able to do that by myself, because the decision is not solely up to us.
Second phase, going to that second phase, can you give me some indicator in terms of a timeline there?
I can't, simply because I don't believe it's solely in our jurisdiction to address. It's not necessarily a CDC.
So who else is part of the decision-making process then beyond CDC?
I believe Department of Transportation, OMB. There are numerous others that are making these decisions.
I want to follow up with you, and I know we have an opportunity for that later, and I'll look forward to that. But again, you need to, CDC's role is to work through the health safety. We understand and we respect that, but just trying to gain some sense as to timing. Quick question for you with regards to vaccine hesitancy. We've got Alaskans vaccinated, they're ready to go. Understand that, okay, we got to keep masks on, we have to continue social distancing. There's still the issue of whether or not the guidance for the schools is going to allow kids to get back in. One of the things that I'm hearing from folks is, why am I even going to bother getting the vaccine if after I'm fully vaccinated, everything is still the same? I'm told that it's not safe to be on an airplane or on a cruise ship. If I'm exposed to someone who has the virus, I still have to quarantine, maybe not for as long a period. How much of the guidance that we have in place, and to Senator Burr's point about how long it takes to get that clear guidance, to Senator Collins' point about the school guidance and the reopening, is that contributing to the hesitancy that we're seeing?
Thank you for that question. I think there are a lot of reasons for vaccine confidence. We articulated some of those earlier: convenience, speed at which this happened, and personal, concerns about side effects and whatnot. I do think as more people are vaccinated, we are working to move forward on that guidance. The initial guidance was put forward with just 9% of the population vaccinated. That allowed actually for small gatherings in people's homes, for grandparents to hug their grandchildren even if they were unvaccinated. There's been since nursing home guidance so that we can visit our loved ones in long-term care facilities. One of the things that's been challenging with travel is that, as I think people are aware, last Friday was the busiest travel day of the season since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic in March of 2020. 1.3 million people traveling through our airports. This just at a time when we have still 50,000 cases a day, and we know our variants have traveled through these airports. We know that travel is a time when people, not necessarily in flight itself, but travel is a time when people bring these variants home, bring these variants to other places. So we're balancing the fact that vaccinated people will likely travel with unvaccinated people. There is travel happening. We had surges after July 4th. We had surges after Labor Day. We had surges after the Christmas holiday, and we want to just make sure we're doing it safely. We're actively reviewing it right now.
I'm well over my time, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Casey.
Chair Murray, thank you very much. I want to thank the witnesses not only for appearing, but especially for your service to the country. I think I have two questions. I'll start with the first one with Dr. Kessler and Dr. Walensky. And this comes right from home. Local communities frankly asking me, and I'm sure others, to ask this question. And here's the predicate for it. As vaccine production increases dramatically in the coming months, and that's good news, and the venues in which people are vaccinated increase, it's critical that every stakeholder in the distribution and administration process have access to the information, the data that they need. At the state and local level, that includes getting data from the federal government, not just about the vaccines allocated to that jurisdiction directly, but information about vaccines that will be flowing to that jurisdiction through some of the direct federal partnerships like the program for federally qualified health centers and the retail pharmacy partnership. So here's the question for Dr. Kessler and Dr. Walensky. Will you commit to ensuring transparency of this information to assist state and local leaders in making decisions about the vaccine campaigns within their jurisdiction?
Yeah, I'm happy to start with that. Thank you, Senator. The operation is responsible for how vaccines are allocated. Those vaccines are allocated directly to the states. I've been on weekly governors' calls where we have provided the governors a 3-week timeline for how many vaccines they can expect this week and 2 weeks after this week. That's the first that has happened during this administration, so that we have been able to give governors a line of sight so that they can plan 3 weeks ahead of time. There's also also allocation to federal agencies, Department of Defense, the VA, Bureau of Prisons, and FEMA. And then there's allocations that go directly to federally qualified health centers and the Federal Retail Pharmacy Program. Those decisions are made after extensive deliberation and discussion. They're made by the operation, but those discussions happen at all levels of HHS. Thank you.
Dr. Kessler, anything you wanted to add on this?
Senator, the answer is yes. We commit to that transparency. As Dr. Walensky said, the administration is giving 3 weeks, looking ahead 3 weeks. The reason why it's only 3 weeks is the realization that vaccine is being made real time. It's coming off the line, and they are projections. We have every confidence that we'll have enough vaccines, but it's a very human, when you're dealing with a very human process, it's biologics have to be made very carefully. So we are making projections 3 weeks ahead of time, but we want to be fully transparent on what we see coming, and we are trying to do that.
Thank you, Doctor. I guess my last question, I'll try to, in the remaining time, ask this question of Dr. Fauci, if others wanted to chime in if we have time. But this is really just projecting the biggest challenges you think we face, the most urgent, the most difficult. I realize they can be multiple at the same time, but Dr. Fauci, when you look forward, just down the road a few months, in terms of just the public health challenge we have, how would you rank or itemize the challenges that we face? Are you more concerned about the impact of variants, or the struggle to get people vaccinated, or is it both, or do you have some other worries that I haven't articulated? And I know others may have spoken to this earlier, but I'd like to get your view.
Thank you for the question. There are a couple of things that concern me. Probably the one that's the most prominent is my concern that we will declare victory prematurely. If you look at the dynamics of the outbreak, it's a very, very high peak that we had following the holiday season that was expected to have a peak, but not that high. It really went up to 300,000 to 400,000 new cases a day at one point. It's coming down sharply now, but we seem to be plateauing at a level that's unacceptably high, around 50 or so thousand cases a day. This is what's happened in previous surges, where you come to a plateau at a high level and then you start to surge. Europe is generally about 3 to 4 weeks ahead of us in the dynamics of their outbreak, and what they saw a little while ago was a plateauing of their decrement. They were coming down nicely, and then they plateaued, and just as you might have predicted, they then started to go up. And a couple of weeks ago, they had a 9% increase. Now they have about a 5% increase. I'm concerned that if we pull back in our enthusiasm for the fact that vaccines are rolling out and things look good, if we pull back prematurely, we may trigger another surge, and that would really set us back in all the things that we're trying to do.
Thank you, Senator Casey.
Thank you.
Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are going to be for Dr. Fauci and Dr. Marks. Going to be two questions. One, you can sense the frustration from Senator Paul, Cassidy, Murkowski, many of us, because we know we don't have complete data. We know we got to stay disciplined before we get this thing under control. But in kind of a top level way that I'm looking at it, we got to get to herd immunity through natural infection or vaccination. I want to make sure that you can take that in vaccinations and come up with herd immunity. If the conferred immunities are going to be about as good with a vaccination versus getting the infection, I'm taking 30 million as the number of cases tested. Would like your opinion on how many completed vaccinations there have been. And then the big variable, how many untested cases to get to that 250 million. And like your opinion on those numbers, because when you can give us a little bit of certainty or idea on that, it gives us hope, like Senator Paul said, to maybe stay tough and get through it. Second question would be, if vaccinations aren't as effective as we want them to be due to a cascade of variants, then do we need to turn our attention to therapeutics if this is going to be something we battle with over the long haul?
So thank you for that question. I want to just harken back to what I had said some time ago to Senator Burr and some of the comments that Dr. Walensky had made about this magical terminology of herd immunity. We could get to where you and Senator Murkowski and others want to get without necessarily reaching this arbitrary percentage, because as Dr. Walensky said, it's going to really depend on a number of things, because it depends on what the RO of the virus is. And if you have variants that come in, they'll modify it. There are a lot of things that modify it. I like to look at it in a different way. I like to look at it in that every day we get 2 to 3 million more people vaccinated. We also still get people infected. If you look at the number of people that are protected, we don't necessarily have to reach 85% of the population to get to the things that you were asking for about your businesses in Alaska and about schools being open the way Senator Collins had said. We can approach that in a real meaningful way before we get to this magical number. So I made the estimate.
Do you think there are untested but out there? Because to me, that's the big plug-in variable. I'm reading 4 to 5. Is it 4 to 5 or is it closer to 2 or 3? And if we have no idea, that's the biggest variable when you get to that point where you get to what you're talking about. Yeah. What do you do in your modeling? How many untested cases do you plug into the model you're using?
No, see, there really is no model right now for herd immunity. It's purely an estimate. The only thing, take measles for a second. We absolutely know what the level of herd immunity is for measles because we've had multiple instances where when you went below a certain level of protection in the community, you had outbreaks. It's a highly transmissible virus. The vaccine is excellent, 98% effective. When you get down below 90% of the population being immune, when you get into the 80s, you get the kind of outbreaks that we saw in the New York City metropolitan area. We don't know that yet for coronavirus. We just don't know what it is
I
yet.
understand that. And what about if it seems to be an elusive thing to get through vaccinations and natural infection? Where do we start putting more emphasis on therapeutics?
Maybe I'll chime in. There is a fundamental difference between measles and COVID-19. Measles is a virus that does not vary with time the way that COVID-19 is varying. And the reason for having this issue of needing to have the best immunity you can and potentially vaccinating people who have already had COVID-19 is to get to high enough antibody levels to make sure that as these new variants come along, we are not basically decimated by yet another version of COVID-19 coming across the population. So it's essentially doing it right the first time to prevent another set of closures.
Which has a lot of kind of uncertainty, timeline, indefinite. And I think that's the tough thing I think you guys have to contend with. Let's get to the question of then therapeutics versus vaccines. Because isn't that the way we finally hammered AIDS, was with the therapy? You know, because a vaccine is never
for a global pandemic like we have here. I think we really have to probably. I'm going to defer to Dr. Walensky, who's more expert than I am, but I think vaccination is probably. Don't get me wrong. We need better therapeutics, and absolutely right.
And/or natural infection, right?
I think we'd like to avoid natural infections because I think, as was already mentioned at this hearing, we have this COVID long hauler syndrome. So I probably prefer not to have those people have those long-term effects. So we'd like to prevent natural infection by providing immunity through vaccination.
You want to add anything?
I agree completely that the idea of treatment as prevention, as we have with HIV, doesn't work because you're dealing with an acute syndrome that lasts just literally for a few weeks. Virologically, you may have persistence of symptoms. Treatment is important because you don't want people to get ill, and we've had 530,000+ deaths. You can avoid that with good treatment. But the dynamics of an outbreak absolutely is going to depend upon the vaccine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to note that Dr. Fauci does need to leave at 12:15, so we're going to try and get through as many as we can. Senator Smith.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Murray. I think you almost promoted me to doctor, but I'm not sure. I want to thank our panelists for being with us today. And as I've been listening to the testimony and also the questions that are being asked, I'm thinking about a conversation I had yesterday with the folks at Hennepin Healthcare, which is a safety net health system in Minnesota, level 1 trauma center in Minneapolis. And one of the things that one of the caregivers said really has stuck with me. He said, we are just so worried here as we continue to grapple with the impacts of COVID in this community that the world is going to move on. And, you know, as Dr. Fauci and others have said, we're still seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50,000 cases or more of COVID a day and 1,200 daily deaths. So I think it's important that we stay vigilant and keep our focus. And of course, also look to where the good news is. And I think we can do both of those things. Dr. Walensky, I want to ask you about something around vaccine distribution. This is a bright spot. So tribal nations in Minnesota have done an exceptional job in distributing the COVID-19 vaccine. And here's just one example. The White Earth Nation in northwestern Minnesota partnered with Monoman County to distribute the vaccine and has now, this county, one of the highest vaccination rates in the whole state. And what they did is they established a joint task force with the county, helped to streamline vaccine distribution and manage the supply in order to get the vaccine out. And today, White Earth Reservation, where of course there's a mix of native and non-native people living, and is a sovereign nation, so they set their own guidelines and about who can be vaccinated. Today, because of this close collaboration and the partnership that they have, they've been able to, anyone who is over 18 who lives on White Earth Reservation has been able to be vaccinated. So another example is the Boys Fort Mobile Vaccination Clinic, which is, they have brought, this is another northern Minnesota Ojibwe tribe. They have brought their mobile vaccination unit to tribal members in Duluth and Minneapolis, those who don't live on tribal lands. So Dr. Walensky, could you just comment on why you think this is working and what this can teach us about addressing the challenges that we see around the country in getting equitable distribution of vaccines?
Thank you so much for that question, Senator. I think as I mentioned several weeks ago, we had a vaccine forum where we brought people together to talk about their best practices, lessons learned, how they've been able to distribute. We had over 100 tribal participants, and I don't know if those were specific examples that were given, but those are among the examples where we can say, this is trusted partners, this is community engagement, this is people getting the message from people they know, places that they trust. This is part of why we want to engage at not the state level, not necessarily only the state level, or we need to get down to the local level. People don't necessarily want to hear from me that they should be getting their vaccine. They want to hear it from their local pharmacist. They want to hear it from their tribe members to say, we've all been doing this together. They may actually need to have it not just be convenient, but be able to revisit it and say, well, maybe I'm not ready today, but it turns out tomorrow I've noticed that 5 of my friends, 5 of my community members have gotten it, and they're willing to engage. I think these are important lessons that we need to be that we are learning, and that we need to replicate those lessons in not just the tribes, but in other areas around the country, as well as rural areas around the country.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with that. I think one of the things that's important about this is that we sometimes think that what we are experiencing is vaccine hesitancy, when actually what we are experiencing is a lack of access, and especially a lack of access from trusted providers. So I think it's important. Dr. Fauci, I want to try to get this question into you quickly. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune recently reported that Minnesotans are using websites for vaccine shopping. So they're trying to figure out what is the best brand and then shopping around for that and trying to figure out the benefits of one vaccine versus another. Dr. Fauci, what would be your message to people who are trying to compare the efficacy of these different vaccines as they are making decisions about how to move forward? What will you tell them?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because that really is an important issue. We have 3 highly efficacious vaccines with a good safety profile. I think it is not appropriate, understandable, but not really appropriate to be shopping around to see which one you could get because you're making a guess of which one is better. The only way you know if one is better than the other is to do a head-to-head comparison in a clinical trial. So my advice when people ask me is that what is the most important thing is to get vaccinated as quickly as possible when your turn comes up to get vaccine. Which particular candidate you get is really not nearly as relevant as getting it as soon as you can. So if you go into a clinic and they have any of the one of the 3 available, I would just take it rather than waiting maybe a few weeks to a month for something that you think might be better. All 3 are highly efficacious.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Leadership is what America is now looking for. They're looking for a strong, consistent, honest voice from the NIH, from the CDC, the FDA, and from the White House. And frankly, Dr. Fauci, a nation is turning its lonely eyes to you for leadership. Let's talk about schools for a second. I think you all know and agree with me, our schools, our youth are in a mental health crisis. Our youth are suffering from increased instances of suicide, substance abuse, overdoses, depression, a true epidemic. And this was very predictable for all of us from the healthcare field, that when we close down schools without the social interaction, we'd see increased mental health crisis. Totally predictable. Let's talk about the science of viruses for just a second. As a private practice OBGYN for 25 years, I would tell you that viruses are predictably unpredictable. That how they impact a non-pregnant versus a pregnant woman certainly is different. And what I feel like when I try to listen very hard to you all is that that the little science we do have is being presented as dogma, as gospel, and we know it's not. It's anecdotal at best. All I've heard so far today is basically anecdotal experiences. When it comes to schools, we need to hear a stronger voice from you all, from leadership. We need to hear a stronger voice, not a wishy-washy voice. And Dr. Fauci, I would ask you, do you agree with me that the benefits outweigh the risk of getting children back in school? Will you tell America we need to get our kids back to school?
I have said that repetitively. As you know, you've obviously been following what I've been saying. I've been saying the most important thing we need to do is to try as best as possible to get our children back to school safely. And that's exactly what I've been saying over and over again, right in this room in previous hearings. I think the chair has heard me say that multiple times.
Based upon everything we know about the virus, the epidemic we have now, do you feel the benefits outweigh the risk of getting children into schools across America?
Well, I mean, if you listen to the CDC's recommendations, that's exactly what they're saying. They're talking about the benefits versus the risk. And as you know, their guidelines are trying to get people to follow guidelines that will get the children back to school with the minimum risk.
I was hoping a yes or no answer, but I'll move on to mask. 1 mask, 2 masks, oh me, oh my. You know, President Biden recently said that we should all wear masks until everyone is vaccinated. That's probably the worst thing that could have been said for compliance. So many people have said, why would I go get a vaccine when the president says we have to keep wearing masks until everyone's vaccinated? We Americans feel like the goal line keeps moving. And I understand your fear of different variants and all those different things going on here, but where is the science that clearly shows wearing masks is helpful after you've had the vaccines? And for the sake of time, I need to move on, but all I've heard the question asked already, and I've heard anecdotal evidence, but I would love to have you all send me the studies that show that it is absolutely beneficial to wear a mask after you've been vaccinated or if you've had the virus. And we all want to know, where is the goal line? When can we stop moving masks? I want to talk about the border, though. That's what I'm really concerned about. I just visited the border. My 3rd trip there. It's certainly a humanitarian crisis, and I'm sure anyone that's been down there would agree with me, that it's a national security crisis, but I want to talk about the healthcare crisis going on there. When I went down with a group of physicians 3 years ago or so, I was concerned about just the doctors, the nurses being overwhelmed. I was concerned about tuberculosis, hepatitis, scabies, sexually transmitted diseases, and other communicable diseases. But now, based upon what we know, the incidence of COVID is 5 to 25% of the people coming across the border. And then what I see is they take a group of folks, 50 to 60 people, they put them on one bus, and they do a couple of exams, and they all put them in some type of a dorm setting. So if they all didn't have the virus, they soon will, and then we let them go out into the public. That just seems hypocritical. You know, the application that you're talking about for when we can let ships come to Alaska, and the concern about variants from South Africa, that just seems hypocritical to me. While I respect completely where you're coming from, it seems like it's a double standard. Dr. Fauci, are you comfortable with what we're doing on the border from an ID standpoint?
The reason I would have to hedge on that, because I'm not really very deeply familiar with the details of what's going on at the border. And that's perfectly honest with you, Dr. Marshall. I really am not familiar enough with the situation at the border to be able to make a comment. If I was, I would.
Whose job is it to know that?
I can chime in and say that I am aware that at CBP sites that there's overcrowding and that we need to, from an infectious disease standpoint, from a COVID standpoint, we need to de-densify what is happening at CBP. We have been working closely with ORR as our children leave CBP and move to the ORR sites to work towards getting them screened and tested, which is why they have, you know what % positivity they have there. Those ORR sites are much improved compared to the CBP sites with regard to how those children are cared for, who is caring for them, and we are providing technical guidance on those ORR sites to work to make sure that they are as safe as possible using mitigation strategies at their
But do you see the hypocrisy in what we're doing to America? We're saying that I can't have a barbecue with my entire family on the July 4th. I can't have Easter service worship together. But we're going to let people come across the border in mass numbers and just release them into. Does that not seem hypocritical?
I think there are two different situations that we have to handle. We have to handle in two different ways, and we have guidance and strategies for how we're providing technical guidance for the challenges that are occurring in the density at the border, and then we're trying to keep the public safe using evidence-based strategies there. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr. I'd really like to thank all of the doctors for being here, for their tireless service to our nation, for their information, for their hard work in studying. And I'd like to just make this other comment, that most of us here do understand that data takes time. Good data takes time. Coronavirus is a new virus. It hasn't been around that long. We haven't collected all the data to show us what the trends or variants may be. It's, of course, evolving, and that good data that will help us do the predictions that epidemiologists and doctors like yourselves helped to do will be there. It's just a matter of time. I appreciate how quickly you're working on that. But we also have to keep focused, I believe, on treatment options as we have more variants, and of course, people will continue to contract the disease, and we know vaccinations need to go up, but we want to reduce the deaths if you do contract the disease. 5,100 Nevadans have already, over 5,100 have already died from COVID. I don't want to see that going up. And so I have introduced bipartisan legislation to hopefully track a diverse set of COVID patients, long-term, longitudinal study, and report those findings on a regular basis. So, Dr. Fauci, I really appreciated so much the conversations we've had in the past, talk about monoclonal antibodies, other antivirals. We know both have helped. Like I said, people are still dying. So is it an issue of patients not having access to some of these? And what can you maybe tell us about what's in the pipeline for therapeutics for those who unfortunately may still contract the disease?
I had outlined, and I'll briefly repeat it in my opening statement, that we have therapeutics for people with early disease The difficulty logistically is that getting people early enough to make it work. Monoclonal antibodies clearly work in the setting of getting people before they enter the hospital and before they develop advanced symptoms. Every study that's looked at monoclonal antibodies after a person has advanced disease in the hospital has shown no benefit. We do have good drugs for advanced disease, particularly the state-of-the-art of using dexamethasone with advanced individuals. We have a number of others under emergency use authorization. But getting to the point that I think you're suggesting, Senator, is that the real end game for this is to develop targeted antiviral drugs very similar to what we did so successfully with antiretrovirals for HIV and for curative therapies for hepatitis C. We are now investing a considerable amount of resources in doing that. We have a couple of candidates now that look good that actually had been developed previously that we're putting into phase 1, 2, and 2A and 2B trials. So you're absolutely correct. We need to do better on therapy, and the strategy for the future is the direct antiviral therapies that are similar to what we did with HIV. Thanks.
Well, I'd like to build on that then, because we hear about the long haulers or the long-term effects of COVID-19. We see people really suffering from this. We know about 30% of all COVID patients really continue to suffer from some form of ill-defined symptoms, prolonged fatigue, brain fog, as some people are calling that. It may render folks unable to go to work. It puts them at risk for continued social isolation and other kinds of issues. It may certainly decrease their immune system. And so we have to be sure that we don't deny benefits to these folks who have the long haul symptom. But what can you tell me about, Dr. Fauci, about NIH, how you're evaluating these troubling long-term health consequences? And are there treatments available? What's in the pipeline there for those that are continuing to suffer?
Right.
Some people sense a smell. I've heard rancid smell. Now they get their smell back, but everything smells sour or rotten.
Right.
What are you doing?
We've initiated a major program to the tune of $1.15 billion that we're doing at the NIH, also in collaboration with the CDC, and following cohorts of individuals to determine the incidence, the prevalence, how long these symptoms last. We have some studies say they go out up to 8 months or longer. You asked a very relevant question. What about treatment of them? It is very difficult to devise a therapeutic regimen when you don't know what the underlying pathogenic mechanism of the disease is. And that's the real stumbling block here, and why we are intensively studying these individuals, because although it is an absolutely real phenomenon, we don't have any pathogenic mechanisms right now that we're certain of that has a commonality among all of them. We will find that out, and when we do, then we'll be able to devise hopefully appropriate and effective therapies.
Well, thank you. Again, appreciate everything you're doing. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Coach Tuberville.
Thank you, Senator Burke. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your service. Kind of reminds me of my old job, 40 years coaching college football, sitting there listening to a bunch of armchair quarterbacks. Everybody's got the right idea of how to run your job. But thank you for what you're doing, because this country, and I guess 340 million people are counting on y'all, and several billion that's not in this country. So it's very important, and you know, it just brings to the fact of where we are in this country. On the campaign trail for the last 2 years, I kept telling people, really the last year, that, you know, everybody thinks they're going to come up with a vaccine. Americans are going to come up with this vaccine, because that's what we do. But we need leadership. Dr. Fauci, you're the Tom Brady of the COVID team. You've had good days and you've had bad days, and we thank you for what you've done. We just need leadership from you and consistency. You know, everybody that I talk to, you know, they understand where you're coming from, but sometimes we change in midstream. You know, coaches can't do that. You know, you got to stay with what you believe in. So we just ask you to, you know, just be firm with us. tell us. You know, you had people in here today, Senator Rand talking about the mask. Tell us what you believe, because we know very little about it. You know, the American people don't know anything about it. Dr. Walensky, you got a tough job in front of you, and thank you for taking it on, really. Again, this is not a Republican or a Democrat disease. You know, this is a worldwide disease, and our kids are hurting. I will tell you that. Our kids are hurting. I've had friends that died. I've had people go out of business. We got to get this country back open as soon as we can. I mean, we can't drag our feet much longer, but we can't put people in harm's way either. We really can't. So, thank you for what you're doing. I'll reiterate what Mr. Marshall said, or Senator Marshall said, about people in Alabama can't understand why we're letting people in when we know some of them have the coronavirus. We're a loving country. We like everybody. My God, we put our lives on the line, our country on the line, our businesses and everything else on the line for the last year. And for some reason, the White House continues to let people in with this virus. And it's just mind-boggling to us that pay taxes, everybody that pays taxes, that we'll help them. This ain't the time. This is not the time to do it. And I think it's you guys' job is to go up there and say, listen, what are we doing? We can't do this anymore. We got to get the people back to work and kids back in school and go back to church and get back to a normal life. And we've just got a double standard here right now it just amazes me. But again, I don't have any questions. Thank you for what you're doing. We're looking up to y'all, and tell us what to do. Please tell us what to do and how to get through this, because we have a lot of people in trouble, mentally in trouble, not just physically, but mentally. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, can I make a comment just in response to something that you said that's really very important? When you have a static situation that doesn't change, when you do change your mind, then you're flip-flopping. But when you have an evolving situation, when the scientific evidence and data roll out and you learn more things in March that you didn't know in February, that you didn't know in January, that's the reason why you may hear us be saying things that seem to be different from one month to another, because you make a decision, you make a policy, you make a recommendation based on what's going on and the data at the time. So I just wanted to say that, because you make a very good point when you were talking about consistency. We try to be consistent, but we have to be consistent with the data as it exists.
James, the game plan changes, doesn't it?
You bet. If you're playing against the zone or you're playing against a man-to-man, it's different.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. But when you do change it, sell it and stick with it.
Right.
I mean, that's what we're all counting on.
Thank you.
We're counting on y'all. Thank you.
Appreciate it, sir.
Senator Moran.
Senator Burke, thank you. Gentlemen, ma'am, thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to our nation. Dr. Marks, it's nice to see you. I'll see you in the FDA in the appropriations process. And Dr. Kessler, thank you for your help in regard to helping us with the care for veterans. And we're working to pass legislation, passed the Senate last night with a conversation we had in our hearing about spouses and caregivers for veterans. So that issue that I raised with you is progressing. Dr. Fauci, I didn't have enough of you in the appropriations process, so I've joined the Health Committee.
Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask you a question, and then I think I'll visit with Dr. Walensky. It's going to be a bit outside of COVID-19, all that's related. So you better than anyone know the resources that NIH has devoted to combating COVID-19. The research and the response. I'd like to be reassured that despite that important work, that the other things that are important to America that are led by NIH research are not suffering. So how do you see the overall picture at NIH during this time of COVID-19?
I think I would not be totally frank with you if I told you that things are just exactly the way they were prior to COVID, Senator. There has been a diminution of activity in some areas for the simple reason that a lot of the clinical center, for example, is not going at full capacity for reasons that relate to the outbreak itself. As far as our grantees on the outside, we are continuing the same sort of support for all the other diseases that I know you're interested in. Cancer, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all of those are going well. But I think across the country, the same way that other areas of our society have been dampened down a bit by this outbreak, I think some of the research endeavor, by the very nature of when you shut down a lot of things, including accessibility, for example, of certain types of approach. But I want to give you my absolute promise, and I'm sure that Dr. Collins, were he here, he'd tell you the same thing. We give you our absolute commitment that we will do everything we can to make sure that nothing important slips in the other areas of research.
It's a matter of saving lives with COVID and outside the other afflictions and diseases that Americans are afflicted with. Let me turn to the CDC. Dr. Walensky, it seems important to me. I mean, I've heard while I have 3 hearings going on this morning at the same time, I've heard most of the testimony and responses to questions. And I certainly am a promoter and proponent of people being vaccinated. And I think that the CDC could be helpful if there are guidelines for instructions and suggestions for those who have been vaccinated were current and consistent and timely. So what is it that CDC would tell someone today that their behavior or conduct can change, or what their behavior or conduct should be following vaccination?
Thank you for that question, Senator. About a week ago, we released our first guidance on first step on what you can do if vaccinated. And that included things like small visits in your home, visits with other vaccinated people, unmasked and undistanced, so that you could dine with other vaccinated people in your home. You could also visit with unvaccinated people as long as people in their home don't have high risk of severe disease. So that is, we're still looking at data regarding whether people who are vaccinated can be asymptomatically infected and potentially transmit to other people. In that case, we wouldn't want you to be living with somebody who was immunocompromised on chemotherapy and whatnot, because we would worry about severe disease in that household. We've also released guidance on the fact that you don't have to quarantine if you have been exposed and you are vaccinated. So the quarantine has gone away with regard to people who are being vaccinated. We're revisiting what we should do regarding travel for those who are vaccinated, and that should be coming forward soon. That's going to likely be the next step in this regard. I want to remind people that we have now 12% of the population fully vaccinated, 39.9 million people. The initial guidance was released when we had 9% of people vaccinated. So as more and more people are getting vaccinated, as we are getting more and more data about the implications of vaccination with regard to asymptomatic infection and potential transmission, those guidelines will continue to emerge as you're requesting.
Let me suggest in the 2 seconds that I have left, or that I had left 5 seconds ago, that I would ask you to be concerned. This is true for every agency here that's represented here. A rumor in today's social media world, a rumor about a problem with a vaccine, a consequence which could be false, but it is easy for fear to spread among Americans. You need to be prepared with the science and medicine to respond quickly to put down a rumor. And I hope that's the case in all of your circumstances.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Lujan.
Thank you so very much, Chair. I really appreciate that. Dr. Fauci, before I begin with my questions, just wanted to ask you, does wearing masks stop the spread of COVID? Or help prevent the spread of COVID?
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't hear your question.
Dr. Fauci, does wearing masks help stop the spread of COVID?
Absolutely.
Should people keep wearing masks?
Absolutely.
I think there's a reason, Dr. Fauci, that even physicians, when they're in surgery and practicing, that they wear face coverings because it stops the spread of infection. And I think it's important. So I just wanted to make sure that we gave you time to clarify that after some of the previous questions that have been asked today. Dr. Fauci, first to each and every one of our panelists, including yourself, thank you for what you've been doing to save people's lives and to defeat COVID-19. There are a couple areas where I do have some concerns, and it's based on some of the data. According to the CDC, Native American and Latino populations living in the United States are more than twice as likely to die of COVID-19 and more than 3 times as likely to be hospitalized as their white counterparts. Despite this data showing us that communities of color in the United States have been hit the hardest by this pandemic, Latino and Black people are receiving smaller share of vaccines compared to the larger population. On February 19th, Dr. Fauci, you said that racial disparity was very disturbing, and I appreciate that. Given the recent polling that there is little difference between racial groups in terms of how much they want a vaccine, how can the federal government and will the federal government increase access to vaccine in Latino, Native American, and Black communities?
This is a major initiative, Senator, that the administration, the president himself, is very serious about, and it has to do with any of a number of things that are being put in place to allow equity and easy accessibility. For example, community vaccine centers in areas that are demographically represented by minority communities, community health centers, the same thing, having pharmacies that are stocked with vaccines in areas where there are representation of minorities to a high degree, to have mobile units to go out into the community, particularly in those areas that are underserved, and to increase the number of vaccinators, people who can put vaccine into people's arms, be they military, be they retired physicians, nurses, and healthcare providers. This is a high, high priority for the administration to include equity into our vaccine program.
Appreciate that response. And while I do have some concerns and questions surrounding the decisions that were made by HRSA with the initial 250 sites that were identified, including the first 25, I appreciate the expansion of those sites to 750, which has expanded more sites in New Mexico, including in rural communities. With that being said, Dr. Fauci, I believe that the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, a measure that takes into account racial and socioeconomic factors and also rural communities, would be a useful index to allocate a certain percentage of vaccine doses to address these disparities. The state of New Mexico has designated 25% of vaccine doses based on SVI, and I know it was announced last month that FEMA has partnered with CDC to launch vaccination sites based on their SVI. Yes or no, do you agree that using SVI as a measure in allocating vaccine doses could potentially help address vaccine disparities?
I think it would, Senator. I would probably ask Dr. Walensky, since it is a CDC issue, if you have any comments on that.
Yes, we are using that. We are using SVI as a mechanism by which to include FEMA sites. We actually look at, in collaboration with FEMA, to look at both census data to make sure we're getting large populations, as well as SVI. We have a benchmark SVI. We're also looking at the SVI data for distribution. We know we have work to do in this area, and while we're looking at the data, we also know we don't need the data in order to improve, because we know we have improvements to make.
And I raised my concerns about HRSA's initial decision with the first 250 sites that were announced, the rollout of the first 25. And the first 250, New Mexico, which is a large geographical state that has many challenges, was only identified with one center. Dr. Kessler and Dr. Walensky, can I get your commitment today that future programs focusing on vaccine equity will serve not only underserved communities and urban centers, but also those in rural regions as well?
Maybe I'll just chime in here and say that I was really pleased yesterday when CDC announced $2.25 billion in funding to go towards testing in areas that needed more with regard to health equity. This was the first time that we've been able to directly give 19% of that funding specifically to rural jurisdictions, and so that effort is intended to reduce disparities, increase testing, increase mitigation strategies and education, and actually leave a workforce capacity in those areas.
So can I get your commitment that future programs will make that commitment to rural regions as well?
Senator, the answer is yes. Absolutely.
Appreciate that. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. And very much appreciate the explanation there. Thank you very much, Chair, and you'll back my time.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. Senator Byrd, do you have any additional questions?
Thanks, Senator Murray. Guys, we're at the end. I do want to make some comments that sort of tie together much of what we've heard today. Senator Kane said about a reference to a woman, maybe she didn't read the science. Well, I'm going to tell you something you already know. Most Americans don't read the science, and if they do, they're like me. They don't understand the data. And I think there is a lesson to that, and that is that when we put out guidance, when we make suggestions, you can reference to the science, but you have to say it in a way that the American people understand it. So it's not just the guidance that we need, it's an explanation in a common sense way as to why that's the guidance today, so that they can they can apply that to their own lives. Two, Senator Murray said something really important, that we need to do everything we can to raise the confidence of the American people to take the vaccine. To you, Dr. Walensky, guidance contributes to that. To Dr. Fauci, were he here, a simple pitch of if you take the vaccine, the data shows us you won't die and you won't go to the hospital. That's the most compelling argument to make to the American people today that I can think of. But we don't use plain words like that. We come up with something that's way too expanded, that references something, versus something that the American people will understand. Now, these are my comments. I hope the vaccine policy will change in the not-too-distant future with the appropriate focus on geographical, underserved, needed areas, where the policy is we're going to stick the next person in line. Now that we've addressed long-term care facilities, congregate care, the most at risk, I fear, David, that in the not-too-distant future, we're going to be sitting there with vaccines and no arms to stick, based upon the inability of the American people to sort through this, or the frustration of staying up all night to try to get your reservation at CVS, and you finally say, I'm just going to wait until it opens wide open. I may be wrong, but what if I'm right? And I just implore all of you to begin to think through, at what point do we pivot where we say to the American people, if you're over 17, then the vaccine is available to you. You're might have to go stand in line. You might have to get a reservation. But I remember the day I walked into a hospital that their specialty was bypass surgery. And when they explained to me that the first two surgeries in the morning actually spent the night in the hospital the night before, I was bewildered at this. And I said, why? And they said, because if they don't show up on time for their pre-op, then we miss two surgery windows, and those surgery windows are our profit. We'd break even that day if we miss those two. Well, if we miss that next person in line, if we have to wait 5 minutes to stick that person, we haven't maximized the limitations that we have of people, professionals that can load that syringe and stick it in the arm. And I think that's going to become more and more a concern. Lastly, well, this first. With what we know today, our goal of everybody who would like a vaccine by the end of May, I think it is fairly easy to say to the American people, next fall, schools should open and they should all be in person. I think it's fairly easy to say, by the time we get to summer, Americans should fly and they should feel comfortable on an airplane. I think we should be able to tell people to plan their summer vacations. I think we should say next Thanksgiving and Christmas, plan to spend it with your families, both immediate and extended. We have to accept the fact that our goal right now is to be fully vaccinated then. And Dr. Walensky, I'm not saying travel to Germany or travel to wherever, because we're at the mercy of their vaccination schedule as to when we open it up. But let me just say to you, providing some certainty for next Thanksgiving, next Christmas, next school year, even if the CDC policy or the administration policy is not that we're going to open all schools today, we can sort of lean out over our skis and say, but if everything goes like we've got it designed, we can open in the fall, or we can open in person, and there are a lot of parents out there that will be relieved, and teachers are on notice, and students are on notice. Last thing. I recognize the fact that a year ago when the pandemic hit, businesses altered what they did and how they did it. Schools altered what they did and how they did it. Government altered what they did and how they did it. Congress altered what we did and how we did it. The one thing that did not change at your agencies was the responsibility for everybody to show up, to do their job. For a year, we've been reliant on the healthcare professionals that work for you, with you, and beside you to do their job. If not, we would not be here a year later with 3 vaccines. We would not be here with ample supply of syringes and all the accompanying devices and PPE that's needed to carry out the most massive vaccination program that the world's ever seen. We wouldn't be in a position where we could be talking about, let's look around the corner and see how we prepare and what we learn from this. So I ask you all to go back to the people that work with you and for you and thank them on behalf of this committee and this Congress, because without them, we would not have the ability to have hope that this could soon be over, and we wouldn't have a commitment that we could explore how to make sure this doesn't happen again. So I thank each of you for your testimony today. Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Burr. And what Senator Burr just said, I think, is probably the most important thing we have said to all of you in this committee hearing. Thank you to all of your staffs, everyone who's been working really hard on this, and appreciate all that they're doing. So thank you for bringing that up. I just have 2 additional questions, and we'll close the hearing. First of all, Dr. Marks, I wanted to ask you, for a year now, your team has been working around the clock and making sure vaccines and therapeutics are being developed and are safe and effective, and we are all grateful for that work. But an important phase of this work is making sure that vaccines are safe for our children. And I know vaccine manufacturers have now begun work on clinical trials in pediatric populations. Can you update us quickly on what FDA is doing to authorize or approve vaccines and therapeutics for children?
Thanks very much for that question. So all of the manufacturers of the 3 currently authorized vaccines have plans. Either they have clinical trials ongoing or about to start trials in children. They are already trials very advanced in the adolescent age group that is 12 and over. And so there's hope, I think, as Dr. Fauci said, that we will be able to get that population vaccinated for the fall for junior high and high school students. And for the younger children, we do this stepped program of the trials will look at the older young children and then move down. And that's to make sure that we don't injure any children as we are looking at the vaccines. We have to make sure that every step is safe and we don't skip any steps because obviously the safety of our children is paramount. So I think we have a good program in place. We're working with the operation to make sure that that program really will move through. And the hope would be that towards the end of this year, we'll have data in the younger children.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And Dr. Walensky, this pandemic, as you know, has been especially deadly for communities of color and has exacerbated longstanding health inequities. Recent CDC data shows that Black and Latino people are more likely to die from COVID-19 compared to white people. In order to address these disparities effectively, we need to collect complete, reliable data that fully reveals the scope of the problem. Unfortunately, we are still dealing with incomplete race and ethnicity data when it comes to COVID-19, especially in regard to vaccinations. And even when we do collect data, it often doesn't break out in important groups like Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders. I wanted to ask you, what is the CDC doing to streamline data reporting and make sure it includes information on race and ethnicity from the states and other entities?
Thank you for that question. I think there are numerous components there. First of all, I think we need to realize that we know we have a problem before we collect the data. So we're actually actively working toward resolution of some of these issues, even without seeing the data. We know that access to vaccines is more among the white community than in the communities that have been hardest hit. So we need to act before we even see the data, but we need data as well. We're a data-driven organization, and we need to see where the data are. When I came in, there were at least 7 or 8 states, I believe, that actually their data use agreements didn't allow them to report data to us that was in racial and ethnic divided. So we've been working closely with those states to make sure that we can resolve those data use agreements so that we can actually get those data. Once we get them, though, that's not actually the only challenge, because in fact, patients don't want to report. And so we have providers who don't ask the question. Many of these states' data forms say unknown, and so we get, the race and ethnicity data, it's checked off, but it's said unknown, and that's not particularly helpful. So we're working with a lot of states to ensure that we can maybe get rid of that slot so that people have to report it. We are working to try and encourage people to report their race and ethnicity data. One way that we've been able to do this is through the electronic case reporting forms. So those reporting forms, and we've been scaling this up over the last several months, actually can link the test positivity with their medical record in Cerner or Epic, which actually report the race and ethnicity data. So we're working hard, and I think this is going to be a key component of data monetization.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. That ends our hearing today, and I really want to thank all of our colleagues and our witnesses, Dr. Fauci, Walensky, Kessler, and Marks, for a really thoughtful discussion. I think everybody wants you to say it's going to be over tomorrow, and nobody can predict that. And I know you're all working really hard to make sure we have the best scientific, informative information that we can to make good decisions about ourselves and our nation.